Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is the second video in creating a application with ExpressJS and using the boilerplate. So if you watched the first video where I walked through the boilerplate, you downloaded it, you have the files. Now what we're going to do here is just kind of work through some of the configuration you have to do to get things up and working. Okay, because right now what you'd want to do is to get things up and running here. I'm in the folder in my terminal. I'd want to go do, for development purposes, I would want to do nodemon index.js, which is the main server file, but it should error out because there's certain things we need to configure and fix. So I just want to kind of show you these initial steps so you can see what it is that might be causing the issue, so that way you know what you need to configure to get things up and going. Okay. So what happens is it's looking for a database and doesn't have the database name. Okay. Because in your boilerplate, I added in the .env file a placeholder for your database name. Right now, there's no URL there. You need to get your URL for this to work. Okay? So where do you do that? You're going to go open up an account at MongoDB Atlas. Okay? It's free. Go cloud.mongodb.com, and you're going to create a new cluster. And you want to create one of these new sandbox clusters because those are free. There are higher end clusters that you can pay for if you were doing something a little bit more intense. But with your free cluster, you have more than enough power for free to power any sort of, learning type projects. Okay, but once you set up your sandbox cluster, and when you set up, it's going to take a few minutes to get all set up. It's fairly intuitive. Just go to the website, open up an account, set up a free cluster, and you'll see something like this on the dashboard. What you're going to do is you need to get your URL. So you're going to click connect. And you're going to click to connect your application. So if you wanted to actually use MongoDB in your terminal, this is what you would do. And if you wanted to download the software MongoDB Compass and connect to your database from there, you would use this. But we want to connect it to our application. So what it does, and we're using Node.js, so we're going to use Node.js. So depending on sort of what environment you're using, you can choose the right thing for you. But here is my Mongo URL. Okay. So what you're going to do is copy and paste this. Okay. And you're going to want to put that in your .env file. Okay. And then you see here is asking for your username and password. You're going to have to create a database username and password. There will be a button there so you can create an initial user. I've already done that, so you won't see that here. Okay? But you'll create a user, put in the username and password in those spots in the URL, plop it in the .env file, and then everything should start working. I'm going to switch it out now, so I'm going to pause this, put in my variables, so that way you guys don't see them. Okay, now once that is done, okay, now we need to go back to our index.js, open that up. Okay, and again, our database is defined here. So right here, host. So you see here it's saying it's going to equal that environmental variable process.env.db, which we define in our .env file. Now what happens is, let me just fix that. We want this on a separate line, so let me just knock that down there. Now what happens is that in your cluster, think of it as one giant database that can have a lot of mini databases inside of it. Okay, so here you're going to specify what database inside of your database or your cluster you want them to access. You can put whatever name here, and the way it should work is that if it doesn't already exist in your database, it'll just create it. Okay, so we'll test that out in a moment. So I'm just going to leave DB name as, so right now if I go in my, I just click in here, should show me my different databases. So I'm going to let that load up just so you can guys see how this works. Click on collections. Collections, basically think about it this way. You have the main database, you have your sub databases, and then each sub database is filled with collections, which are like tables. So I have this other database from my bootcamp time, GA projects. So once we connect, it's going to create another database in that list, but we'll come back to that, which we'll call DB name because I'm not going to change it from the default. So essentially that's what this is doing. This is connecting to your cluster, and this is saying which database in your cluster you want to connect to. And then down here, it's combining those two to create the URL to connect to that particular database over here. Okay, so just so you understand the flow of the code. Okay, cool. So now that that's configured, let's try running our terminal again and see what else we need to kind of fix. So let me just save that over here. So now it's gonna, since it's a node mod, it's going to try to restart every time I save. So it's restarting, and we still have another error. Cannot find modules controller control.js because we never made a controller yet. So I need to go back to my index.js folder or file, and we're going to go to our controllers. Where are they? I think it's going to be further up. Here we go. So this is just a boilerplate. We haven't actually made anything yet, so we're going to comment that out for the moment. Okay, save. Host plus database is not defined. Let's see here. Const database is defined. Now why? Oh, there's a typo. So let's clean that up. Database. Okay. And let's see if it loads this time. Controller is not defined. Index.js, line 50. Is there another controller that I forgot? Oh, that's right. With every controller, so basically, just so you know what a controller is what tells what URLs are going to go do what. So basically, it's literally your traffic controller. It says, hey, if someone goes to slash whatever, send them to this file, send them this information, whatnot. So this brings in the file that'll be from our controllers folder, but we also have to define it in our middleware down here. So that's right here, this line right here, saying, hey, you know what? That controller we brought in earlier, if anyone goes to any URL that starts with /index, use this controller to tell them where to go. We don't have that set up yet, so we're going to comment that out as well. So let's save. Let's see if we got our server up and running yet. Hello, I'm listening. Cannot read property. Split. Null. Is MonGod not running? Okay, so basically now the server is up, but we still have an issue with the database. Okay, so basically if you go back and take a look at the URL you copied into your environment variable, you'll see the word test. If you copied it from Mongo Atlas, it has the word test built in. So let me go back to connect. Well, if you go back to your .env file, you'll see that. So you actually don't need this database name variable here. If you do want to change which database you're connecting to, just look for the word test in your URL and change it to whatever database you'd like to connect to. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of this because what it's just adding extra to the string that doesn't need to be there. So again, look for the word test. It should be like right before a question mark in the URL. That's actually your database name. So there you can type in the database you want to connect to. So just again, to just make it clear. So let's go back to the overview. Oh, let's go. Actually, yeah, here, connect to your application. So what I'm talking about is right here in the URL. So you see this right here, that's where you put in your database name. So that's what you're going to want to change in the URL if you want to connect to a different database. So I left it as test. So then we should see the test database show up here once we finally connect. Okay, so we get rid of that database variable. So let's just say const mongo URI equals host, and then get rid of database from up here. Okay, cool. So let's take a look at our terminal. Save. And see, it's connecting, still having an issue. Property split, no. Okay, and one other thing about your .env file, make sure that when you put the URL that it's in single quotes, not double quotes, and it's all in one line. And then there you go, we are connected. So if we take a look at here, it says, hello, I'm listening on port 5000. And here it says connection made, so our connection is all set. Okay, cool. So in that case, we are able to connect just fine. Okay, and then let's just double check that it create that test database. So let's go back to my Atlas. Let's go back to here. Let me refresh. Well, I haven't saved anything yet, so that's why it's not going to show up quite yet. Okay, but theoretically, we're connected to a database called test. Cool. So now we have a server, and it really right now doesn't do anything. Okay. So now here we have some basic routes. So this is how a route looks like. So basically what happens here, just to kind of explain why this is app, what we did is we brought in Express up here. So we said, hey, we want Express in this program. And what we have to do is create an instance of the Express object. So this is like saying create an Express that we brought in earlier. So we said, hey, Express is something we have in the program, but let's make an Express. And we're going to call this instance of Express app. So now I can call any functions of that object by invoking app. So that's what I'm doing down here. Okay, so I'm saying, hey, this instance of Express, this app instance, basically, if we notice that there's a GET request coming into our server at the root, so the /, you're going to do this, and it's going to send it to this file, main.ejs, which is over in our views folder. You see this file called main.ejs, okay, which has some boilerplate from a previous project. You can change it to whatever you like. So let's see what happens if we went there. And again, we're on port 5000, so what you're going to do is you're going to type in localhost 5000 to get to the URL. Okay, and you can see that it does realize that the server's running, okay, but there's some errors because of stuff we haven't configured yet. For example, there's this data that we're sending over, when we look in the code, called tab title, which we never defined. So let's see here. Let's see if we can adjust that real quick, just so that way you don't have to, you can see it. Tab title. Okay, captain's log. Oh no, we're looking at bookmarked here. Let's go to Express apps, the tutorial to do app. We want to look in the views here, main.ejs. We're talking about tab title. Let's go back to index.ejs. So then what we need to do is get rid of that inside the partials. That's in the head partial. So see here, what this is, we'll learn later on, is saying, hey, we're going to send in some data called tab title and put it here. But we're not sending in any data. So we're going to get rid of that. Okay, we'll save that. And let's go back and refresh. And there you go. So it actually pulls you into that page. Again, this is not captain's log, but you know, you can edit that to what you want. So now you know that the main page is this main.ejs. And the reason why you have to go edit that head is because we brought in the contents of that head.ejs file up here. This is all called EJS, which is a templating language. We'll get more into EJS later on, but just kind of showing you what's going on as we work through this. Cool. So basically you have a server up and running. But the next thing you need to do, you have your database connected, you have the server running, but we haven't really done anything yet. We have to actually start building out our application now. So the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need our models. So what kind of information do we have? So we already have our users models kind of set up for you. It's built in. And this is what's referred to as a schema for Mongoose. What it does, it's that Mongoose, which is the library that connects to your Mongo database, this tells it what kind of data gets stored, okay, and where does it get stored. So what the way this code reads is that we're bringing in Mongoose. We're saying, hey, you know, we want Mongoose for this particular part of the code, okay, and we're going to refer to it as Mongoose. And what we're going to do is we're going to create something else, a new sort of template for information called user schema. And this user schema is technically a new instance of the schema object that's built into Mongoose. So this is a new Mongoose schema, and the way it looks like is like this. Okay, so basically we're saying there's going to be two pieces of information that get stored in using the schema: the username, which is going to be a string that every user has to have a username, and a password, which is also a string, which every user has to have a password. Cool. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called users, and this users equals a model object, which is essentially that filter that's going to say, hey, and what that filter does, it says when information gets sent in through this schema, we're going to do, or through this filter object, this users variable, we're going to do is we're going to check that all the information matches the user schema, and then we're going to store it in the database in a collection called log users. So it'll actually go inside your database, see if there's a collection called log users, and if it doesn't exist, it'll create it. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. Okay, and then I need to actually export this this schema so that way I can use it somewhere else in my code. So I do module.exports equals users, and now I can send this users object out to use somewhere else in my code, which will be over here. Okay, so that's going to actually be the first controller we need to bring into our code, which will go back to index.js. Actually, we want to bring in the model. So let's copy that code from the controller we have over here. Okay, so essentially what we're going to want to do is bring in this. We're bringing in the schema. We're going to need to do that in our root route because I have all the user routes. Or we can build those out. So we'll come back to that later. Then we'll build out the separate controllers so that way this is a project that looks complete and is all nice and organized. So we'll come back to that, but we want to create another model. So instead of having to sit there and figure out all these things on your own, I created this model bp.js file, which is just a template that you can just basically duplicate. And what we're going to do is we're going to create to-dos. So we'll just call this todo.js. Okay, this already has sort of the initial pieces. We can just kind of delete the comments to make this look a little cleaner. And we're going to make it a to-do. So we're going to make it a to-do schema to keep track of to-dos. Cool. Now what we want to do is just delete all this existing information because we're not going to need it. And again, if you want to know all the different possible kinds of fields and features for a Mongo schema, you just Google the Mongoose documentation. But we're going to keep this real simple. We're just going to have a title field, title for the to-do, which is just going to be a string. And we're going to have a description, or I would say description. Which is also going to be a string, comma. Actually, we don't even need a comma because it's the last item. So there we go. It's going to have two fields, a title and a description string. Cool. And this is going to be called a to-do. So I'm just going to make sure my variables all make sense. To-do. We're going to save it in to-do collection. Actually, we'll just do it lowercase, to-do. And again, we're applying our to-do schema that we defined up top. And we're going to export it as to-do. Cool. So this creates our schema. So basically now we can put information in the database using the schema, but we need to actually create routes to do so. So at this point, I'm going to do the controllers in the next video. I will see you guys there.